truth of the matter is, President Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. But the answer, Iowa, is strong, conservative, Republican leadership back in the White House.
Strong conservative Republican leadership. That's exactly what former U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is hoping to sell to Americans as he jumps into the race for the Republican nomination for president. I'm Lauren Bird, sitting in for Andrew Chang. We're still about a year away from the 2024 Republican National Convention, when GOP members will decide who they want as their presidential candidate. And yet, the race is getting crowded. And one of the latest names to enter the chat is a familiar one.
You know, in contrast to the Democrats' agenda of decline and decay, Republicans have to offer a positive vision of the future grounded in conservative principles, and we got to speak hard truths.
There are a few things about Mike Pence that kind of make him a no-brainer as a candidate for the Republican nomination. Former governor of Indiana, a reliably red state, a long-serving senior Republican in the House of Representatives, and a voting record that firmly establishes him as one of the most conservative members of Congress.
The Republican Party, especially during the George W. Bush era, was heavily defined by cultural conservatism, by religious conservatism. And I think that Vice President Pence, more so than most any other Republican, is very much in tune with those movements.
Pence is a reliable Republican, and that's part of the reason he's been on the ticket before. He was the vice president, a path typically taken to run for the top job, like Thomas Jefferson, Richard Nixon, Al Gore, and, oh yeah, Joe Biden. All VPs who have taken a stab at the presidency. But this is far from a smooth path, because Pence is going up against his running mate, Donald Trump, and that just doesn't happen.
It is very rare for a vice president to ultimately run against the president that they served under. We are in very much uncharted territory with this matchup, and it certainly reflects the uncharted times that we're in right now.
I believe we have to resist the politics of personality and the siren song of populism unmoored to timeless conservative principles, and we need to stand firm on the conservative agenda of life and liberty and a commitment to freedom that has always led us to victory.
That's pretty pointed. Populism, of course, is the calling card of the current frontrunner for the Republican nomination, Donald Trump. So now we've got ourselves a challenge. Trump versus Pence, a former president versus his vice president.
What we saw over the course of Donald Trump's 4 years was Mike Pence in many ways serving as a yes man, serving as somebody who assured people that Donald Trump was doing the right things, assured those religious conservatives that he was on their side. And they had that good relationship for those 4 years, and it really fell apart on one day. And that day was January 6th, 2021.
January 6th, 2021. Trump and his supporters called on Mike Pence to refuse to certify the election of Joe Biden.
There was a very novel legal theory among Donald Trump and his lawyers about what a vice president could do to basically try and overturn the election, or at least to send this issue back to states where they could potentially reconsider whether they wanted to certify Joe Biden as the winner of those states.
The vice president's role is historically ceremonial during the transfer of power, and Pence refused to play along with Trump's theory. He certified the election.
I heard this week that President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. President Trump is wrong.
But I never called Mike Pence a wimp. I never called him a wimp. Mike Pence had a chance to be great. He had a chance to be, frankly, historic. But just like Bill Barr and the rest of these weak people, Mike, and I say it sadly because I like him, but Mike did not have the courage to act.
It was, by anyone's measure, an epic falling out. The Trump-Pence split was complete and final. And despite Pence acting on what he says was his principles, he paid for it dearly.
Mike Pence had a very strong image rating with the Republican Party, and it dropped off a cliff and has stayed at the bottom of that cliff ever since. So he does have some goodwill among Republicans. He's generally more liked than he's unliked, but he's not somebody who's really at the top of Republicans' radars when it comes to the 2024 election.
By one poll aggregator, Pence has just under 4% of the vote, behind former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and well behind the two frontrunners, Ron DeSantis, who's polling at around 22.5%, and Trump, whose latest numbers are over 50%. So what's Pence's play here? Let's go back to the studio and find out. For more on this, we've reached Chris Galdieri. He's a politics professor at St. Anselm College in New Hampshire. Hi, Chris.
Good morning.
So he's quite far behind in the polls, as we just saw. Like, what kind of strategy could actually get him to the top here?
Well, I think Pence, like a lot of these other candidates who aren't named Trump or DeSantis, are hoping that something will happen to upend the dynamics of this primary, that maybe the next Trump indictment will be the one that makes his support fade away, or that DeSantis will turn out to be something of a bust as a candidate, and then there will be room for another conservative candidate.
So he's imagining that, yeah, there's something going to go bad with those two candidates, kind of betting on that. So who is he really appealing to here?
I think there are a couple of groups. I think the biggest one is religious conservatives. If you look at Pence's statements over the past year as he's been exploring a candidacy, if you look at the announcement video he's released, a lot of the imagery in there, a lot of the language in there is very explicitly religious. And so I think he's trying to appeal to your old school sort of evangelical conservatives, folks who once upon a time would have belonged to groups like the Moral Majority, maybe would have voted for Pat Robertson back in the 1980s, and build out from there. I think he's also something of I don't want to say throwback exactly, but he's basically a conservative mainstream Republican. His job in the Trump administration was sort of to be an envoy to those folks, a signal that, look, Donald Trump might be unconventional to say the least, but don't worry, Mike Pence is a, solid, good old-fashioned Midwestern conservative. So, the party can be in good hands there as well.
But a lot of those supporters kind of support Trump, right? So how are Trump supporters going to respond to Pence?
Yeah, I think one of the problems Pence faces going into this primary is that Trump supporters, really, really, really don't like him. Pence is one of the reasons that the January 6th coup attempt failed. Pence refused to go along with the plan to reject electoral votes and throw the election into the House of Representatives. And that is an unforgivable sin in the eyes of a lot of Trump supporters. So I think, as long as Trump is on the scene, as long as there are folks in the primary electorate who can't stand Pence for his actions that day, it's really tough to see how he would be a viable candidate for the nomination.
Right. And so why enter the race at such a disadvantage, I guess? Like, is there something people are overlooking here about Pence?
I think one thing to bear in mind is that Pence has always been somebody who has been looking for the next opportunity. He went from the House of Representatives to governor of Indiana to vice president. So I think from his perspective, why not run for president? The worst thing it could do would be boost your profile nationally and possibly lead to other things. He's also, I think this is something that's often overlooked. He's very much a survivor. He's been not just somebody who has moved up the ladder, but who has aggressively pursued these opportunities to move up the ladder. We sort of forget this now, but back in 2016, getting picked for vice president was Pence's escape hatch from what was looking to be a very bruising re-election campaign for governor, where he might have actually been at a disadvantage and might have actually lost, which is kind of amazing to think of a Republican losing in deep red Indiana. So I think, I don't know that those things add up to a nomination, but I think, Pence is a little savvier, a little cannier than a lot of people give him credit for.
Wow, interesting. Okay, we'll be watching. Chris Galdieri, thank you so much.
Thank you.